In 1965, 18 Israeli military officials entered Singapore disguised as Mexicans. Just a decade earlier, the idea of an independent Singapore was almost unthinkable. For over a century, Singapore was a local trading hub for the British Empire, so it was deeply integrated into the economies of neighboring British colonies. When the British Empire receded from Southeast Asia, Singapore was initially part of the Malaysian Federation. The Federation was built on the foundation of the Strait Settlements, which were a group of British territories located in Southeast Asia, and a collection of British protectorates broadly known as British Malaya. Unfortunately, ethnic tension quickly plagued the Federation. Like many regions of the former British Empire, the Strait Settlements and the Federated Malay Protectorates saw an influx of migrants under colonial rule. When the Federation gained independence, the population was split between native Malays, descendants of Chinese immigrants, and migrants from other parts of the empire, like India. After gaining independence, many of the native Malay citizens wanted the Federation to be an ethnically Malay state. Ethnic Chinese families existed throughout the Federation, but the largest concentration of them was in Singapore, which was 75% Han Chinese. To make the Federation majority Malay, the government of the Malaysian Federation kicked out Singapore, leaving Singapore's 2 million inhabitants practically defenseless. When Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew announced Singapore's independence, it was not a moment of celebration, but a rare and tearful moment of solidarity with his people.
You see, the whole of my adult life, I had believed in Malaysian merger and the unity of these two territories. You know, as a people connected by geography, economics, and ties of kinship.
Years later, reflecting on this expulsion, Prime Minister Lee said, "We inherited the island without its hinterland, a heart without a body." Surrounded by large, hostile countries and stuck on an island smaller than Los Angeles, Singapore needed to build its defenses as fast as it possibly could, and to do that, it needed allies. When Singapore first set out looking for military training, Lee Kuan Yew contacted the British. After decades of colonial rule, Singapore and the British government shared traditions and common interests that made partnership viable. But at this point, the British had already committed to aiding the Malaysian military, and the United Kingdom decided they couldn't invest additional resources into upgrading Singapore's defenses. Typically, Hong Kong is a reliable peer for Singapore to partner with, but for military matters that wasn't the case. Hong Kong was still an overseas territory of the United Kingdom, and they were much better connected to their hinterland in southern China than Singapore was to theirs in Malaysia. Next, he contacted friends in the Indian government and the Egyptian government, including President Nasser. Both sent well wishes to Singapore, but neither offered any aid or training. Then, Lee Kuan Yew reached out to Mordecai Kidron, the Israeli ambassador to Thailand. Back when Singapore was still a part of the Malaysian Federation, Ambassador Kidron and Prime Minister Lee had connected several times. When Prime Minister Lee contacted Kidron for military aid, the two countries had no geographic, ethnic, or economic links, but they turned out to have a lot in common. Both nations were former British colonies that had recently gained independence. They were ethnic minorities in their region, geographically small, populated by immigrants, and surrounded by neighbors with tense relations. Best of all, the two countries had no conflicts of interest. In fact, they both stood to gain from the relationship. Singapore wanted to gain Israeli defense capabilities, and Israel wanted something from Singapore: diplomatic recognition. At the start of their defense relationship, Singapore hadn't recognized Israel as a country yet. In part, Singapore had delayed recognition of Israel to avoid aggravating the Muslim communities within Singapore, but they were also concerned about aggravating the Muslim-majority nations neighboring them, specifically Malaysia and Indonesia, both of which opposed Israel's recognition. For these same reasons, Singapore's military partnership with Israel was kept secret from the public, which is why Israel's military advisors to Singapore were referred to as Mexicans upon arrival. A quick side note, Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew took the time in his memoirs to note that Israelis were given Mexican cover stories because, quote, they looked swarthy enough. Personally, I'm not sure what to make of that. Let me know in the comments what you think. Initially, Singapore and Israel's military partnership started with the simple sale of weapons from Israel to Singapore. Israel was upgrading their tanks and armored vehicles, so they would sell Singapore their old ones. In time, it evolved into a much deeper exchange. As small nations, Singapore and Israel needed lean, affordable, and active militaries that didn't take too many people out of the workforce, but could still mobilize hundreds of thousands of troops quickly if needed. To meet these goals, the Singapore Armed Forces was built in the image of the Israel Defense Force. Mandatory conscription of young Singaporeans created a stable supply of active duty soldiers. After completing their service, citizens remain in the reserves and complete a few weeks of military training every year to stay in fighting shape, ready to be called on when needed. In the eyes of Singapore's government, this system provides social benefits in addition to defense capabilities. Mandatory service, called national service, is seen as a democratizing experience that transcends race and class to unify all Singaporeans. It's also seen as an opportunity to promote a sense of patriotism and nationhood for Singaporeans. In Israel, the IDF plays a similar function. Naturally, Singapore augmented the model with their own policies. Unlike Israel, Singapore's mandatory conscription only applies to men. Women are exempt. Singapore also places an emphasis on recruiting academically talented soldiers. One of Singapore's most prestigious academic programs is an 8-year military service program that involves earning undergraduate degrees from British schools like Oxford or Cambridge, followed by several years of military training before earning a graduate degree in the United States, either in business administration or public administration. On top of all of this, Singapore deployed a strategy called Total Defense, in which civilian ministries like the Ministry of Education were used to encourage physical fitness, patriotism, and to promote a sense of unity based on threats to Singapore's survival. By emphasizing the ever-looming threat of invasion or being economically outpaced, Singapore could keep its citizens unified and highly motivated. 50 years later, Singapore's alliance with Israel is still going strong. For the Israelis, the deal worked perfectly. After receiving military aid from the Israelis, the Singaporeans allowed Israel to open a trade office in Singapore, which was upgraded to an embassy with full diplomatic recognition just a year later. For Singapore, the alliance has been equally helpful. The Singapore Armed Forces that were built in the image of the IDF have successfully deterred invasion and coercion by foreign powers for over 50 years. The autonomy the SAF provides to Singapore's government has been critical to its ongoing success. Today, Singapore and Israel are two of the most technologically advanced countries in the world, and they partner on the development of emerging technologies for military and economic purposes. But on the civilian side, Singapore's total defense approach might be taking a toll on the country. Singapore is in a constant state of defense, concerned about perpetual threats to its survival, whether those are militaristic or economic. The result is a highly motivated society, but also one of the most stressed in the world. This is likely one cause of Singapore's exceptionally low birth rate, which is fueling rapid population decline and poses an existential threat to the nation. This leaves Singapore with a difficult question. Is it time to relax, or is stress the price of survival for Singapore? Fortunately, it's not my job to answer that question, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments what you think, and feel free to suggest new ideas for future videos. If you like this video and want to see more content from Marbury, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, thanks for watching.